uh, of categories like class relations and mode of production. All these have kind of brought back the some semblance of academic relevance in academic activities. I then realized I was working on a very serious conflict I don't name on Northeast India. There was massive riots in the early in the 2000, beginning of 2000 decade. And when I did write about them, and while doing research, my first report was on how the conflict originated between two communities and what are the nature of conflict, what are the historical reasons, what are the immediate reasons and all that. And then I saw some photographs of that conflict. And in the photographs I found, there were 11 people who were brought down from the bus and killed. And one almost brought me to tears. But my writing did not do it. My writing did not bring out that emotional aspects of a conflict. And in Northeast India, we are only dealing with conflict. Most of the time, we know that Northeast India till recently has been mindful of conflict, all kinds of conflict, either being autonomous movements or state versus Indian state versus various groups or communities movement or ethnic conflict or intertribal conflict. All these conflicts we are constantly dealing with it. And we are reporting, we are writing about it. But are we able to bring out that pathos of these things? The way the picture moves me while my report doesn't move. Then I found there is some structural problem in my social science perspective and social science research. I am not able to bring out that pathos that is necessary to make people to understand the nature of a conflict. It's not that, in a conflict, 10 people killed and 20 people injured, and the historical reasons are these, immediate reasons are that, and the results are that, and do a recommendation if you do this is perfectly resolved. This is not social science, but it doesn't bring out the complications, the emotional side of the conflict. So while reading which are basically a historian, reading my PhD, I found that this very old debate between historians and social science, other social scientists, whether this is a social science or not. So I thought that debate becomes more necessary now. So when I went back into it, I found this somehow I missed it earlier, but it brought me when I was thinking that how to bring out that why can't my writing move people the way a picture does regarding a conflict. When a mother loses the son or a son loses the parents in a conflict, the bloodshed. Otherwise, it does become an accumulation and fact, as Gary said when he said, and statistical jugglery. I found Mark Locke in the 1940s had already talked about that history cannot be a social science. He cannot call it a social science. He called it a human science. Professor Guha and others will hear me out that human science, because he says history deals with people, and people are an embodiment of sentiments, emotions, and sensibilities. And if all these are not brought out, then history becomes a very dry discipline. It becomes only a narrative of events and individuals. I want to extend it to other social sciences, at least, and see whether it is possible to call all social sciences, especially political science, sociology, and the human sciences. Now, how do you bring that? How do you do that? He has not prescribed that. I want to mention a particular example that he gave. What is the difference between human science, and other social sciences. He gave, I'm just realizing his example, that if you want, you want to play a flute or make a flute. The flute produces the most moving sounds of all musical instruments. And how does it do it? Simply, in Indian context, there is a piece of bamboo and you make some holes in it. And it produces that sound which moves you emotionally. It can bring you immense joy. It can bring it out to tears simply by its sounds. But is it so easy to make a flute? He brings the distinction that you call a carpenter and ask him to make holes in the bamboo. What do? He uses an instrument or a drilling machine and make 7 holes in the bamboo. But will it produce that sound that a bamboo it will not. I had an encounter while coming from Delhi. My next week was one of the greatest flute players of India, Harim Shah Chaurasia. So I talked to him. He said he's coming to Kokrajhar. While talking to I said, Kokrajhar, why? He started to bring my flutes from there. I came to know that he takes his flutes from Kokrajhar of Assam. He said the best bamboo flutes are found there. And he said, I'm going there, I'll stay there for some time and get the flutes, a number of them, and come back. And then he told me the intricacies, why he has to stay there. He said, there are Boro flute makers, they go to the jungle, get the best bamboo, and they will, those bamboo flute makers who are basically flute players themselves. To be a flute maker, you have to be flute player. This is something very important. An ordinary carpenter cannot be a flute maker. So what he will do, he will make those holes in the bamboo, and with each hole, he will blow into it, and through sense he will be able to see, does it produce the same sound or not, the sound that he requires. And after a lot of things, when there is this, all the holes produces the sound that he requires, and that sound is understood by his senses, not by his ears. And when the finished product is ready, it is a flute, it produces that sound which can make you happy, joyful, or make you burst into tears. And this is how flute is made. Then I understood what Bhagavad was talking, that to be a flute maker, you have to be a flute player. And this is the difference. To be a human scientist, the difference between a human scientist and a social scientist is that since you are dealing with human being, you have to understand the human sensibilities. You have to produce the human sensibilities so that your social science becomes at least representative of what is happening, if not exactly the same, at least close to it. So you have to be, that is I call it, this is a social science job, it's a flute maker job. But in practical science it can be very difficult. How do you do it? I found, I'll again say, I looked into literature of Northeast India, of the period that I'm dealing with. I found some of the writing that I have described things in sometimes 50 pages, sometimes 100 pages, sometimes 400 pages. And those things are described by those poets in 2 lines and through 3 lines, and in a more forceful and powerful way. I'll give you one or two examples. This is a poem by a famous Vedic poet who wrote in 1947. He writes, Bhagat, Shuti, Subhash, these are the Indian nationalist leaders, and her countless sons sacrificed their lives for thy freedom, mother, meaning India. Now the tricolor flag of freedom flies. Let it remain flying as long as the sun and the moon. Mother, victory be to the mother. This is the rough translation of the Meitei poem. So, in 1947, when India becomes independent, this is how Indian independence is described as Meitei poem. And little later, in the 1960s, another poet, a younger poet, writes another poem, and you can see the difference. Actually, there is not much explanation needed for this kind of poem. If you read them, you know what they mean. While loitering in the desolate heat from the sky, a little bird shouted from above, "You are not free, not yet free." So we see the contrast. One is saying that victory to the mother who just got in, and another is saying that yes, we realize now that we are not free. Because that is the time India was the British wanted to break away from India. This is that. And then an Assamese poet in the 19th period writes, it was better if we had the same assertion, independence and pride as before, than the sharply suspicious unknown aliens who descend suddenly and bring distraction, resulting in the acute fright, they are worse than sly frogs. This is the description of present Manipur by a young Manipur poet. He says, murder shootouts have become mundane. It has become every day. Affair, nobody bothers about it. In Kangnai Park, that is Manipur, we don't think of a past or future. We only make sure our thinking has some substance or sanity. We only ensure our means are intact. Another one from same Manipur. Homeland, I left one sultry day, who left Manipur and lived somewhere else, of adolescence. I hear a wicked words now wait on our soil, and gory bodies track unceremonious through our rice fields, that they have dropped the body from the walkability, and the neatly reach ruling our homes. I hear freedom comes there only if escorted by armed men. Sanjay, we know it better because he has done a report on the coalition of Manipur. Like militant had silent every sound, and the timid afternoon was slinking out like peas from the stars. This is about Manipur. I'll talk about Mizo then, since we are here. You know, there is this Mizo folk composition which I wrote about many times. A younger generation may not be knowing. Is that when India was becoming independent, there was a dilemma whether Gujarat should join India or Burma become independent, because there was no clarity what is going to be the future of Gujarat. One folk composition, I'm just giving the translation, is that, you know, if you join India, the rule of the chiefs will continue. And if we seek independence, rule of the chiefs continue. If we remain in India, the chiefs will go, when chieftain will abolish. It was such an important debate and political polarization of those who are familiar with Mizo history. Such a big mobilization, political crisis that was going on. Just 2 line explains. And I have written a book called Contesting Marginality, which is 400 pages, describing the same thing. Same another Mizo poet. It is the new dispensation of Gandhi and Nehru. People say in Mizoram, people did not know about Gandhi and Nehru. But in 1946 itself, this is the poem where it talks about Gandhi and Nehru. This new dispensation of Gandhi and Nehru, The white masters, the heartthrobs have left for London. Now India is ours. This is about Mizoram. Another one from Mizoram. What to talk about this brief of our land? This is during the grouping days. Because I have found that the grouping, the trauma of grouping, very few outside North India understands. Really, very few, because Sunita is a friend name, I have written about it, Ramaswamy has written about it. Many people have written about it. But somehow people feel what's the big deal? But it's such a big deal, which only if you read these folk songs or folk compositions that you understand. What to talk of this grief of our land? Departed are civilized, white-skinned landers. O God, who succor the poor, I pray thee, set our tottering land on its feet again. This first and last two lines kind of shakes me, you know. First, what to talk of this grief of our land. Set our tottering land on its feet again. Why is this land tottering? Very few people understand. This is again repeated many times, very popular among the earlier generation of visual citizens. Pity of pity, our villages are grouped. Now people don't know what is grouped also. Everywhere in Zoram, life has lost its beauty. Women, children and men gathered from every hill feel homeless and stranded like the young bird. In this new habitat, this the group habitat, friends and loved ones have gathered. But I still pine for my old motherland, and the village from where they have been, where the gentle prince still dwells. Another one, silent at the countryside, silent at the churches, where we sang our prayers with our near and dear ones. Lonely doves yearn for their mates. Village skies flickerated by folk of birds now lie forlorn. One of them, last time when I came, we did the field work. I talked about this work. He said, yes, we do visit our ancestral villages now and then. Some of them, of course, they have gone back to their villages. He said, the villages we are born are brought up which are ancestral land, completely deserted. Burnt houses remain, no one goes there. He says, even the birds don't go there anymore. Now, this is another one, this is from Nagaland, because this is also very, very common. It is read by the arts and all that. This is focusing about a girl who was raped by the army man. Her name was Rose. She was a happy child. She went to the rice field singing like a free bird. She was born of the rugged mountain. Then one day the soldiers came to her land. She was captured and shamed. He took her dignity away. Shame, she took her own life. Since she has gone home where she belongs, but she will rise again to sing in glory and to tell her people her story. I read one last from this again from Mizoram. O Lord, forgive us all our sins and trespasses. Guide along, Holy Spirit. Zion's fair flowers, hold me with a powerful hand that blesses men till I reach your sweet and bright heavenly home. What I find, these poems of that period, they capture the political, social, and emotional situation of people and community in such a way, perhaps at least me, fail to capture it in all my writings. Because I'm dealing with the same thing. And then it failed, because I remember that photograph. The photograph which moved me, that my entire 100-page report did not speak one photograph of a mother and son killed can speak. And perhaps I am feeling that artificial division between humanities and social sciences, literature and social sciences, can be broken. And if social science, if we want to capture human sensibilities, human emotions, then make it a human sciences. Can we or should we borrow from folk composition, literature, humanities, and absorb them in your social science research? That will perhaps give us a human touch to all the social science research that we do. This doesn't rule out the fact that in a kind of diseased society that we live now, especially in academics. Can you believe that Northeast India almost have now 50 universities? And Northeast is the zone where most of the conflicts in India has taken place. No university has one peace tradition. Not a single. Yeah, just in 1 minute. Not why there is no center for peace studies in any of these universities. This is possible. On the other hand, we have one counterinsurgency warfare institute where I myself taught there. Of course, after that they threw me out. Where their men in uniform are taught how to violate human rights. This is here in economic Thailand. This is perhaps the dilemma, and this is the crisis the social science research and studies goes on. So crisis is not from just also not from employment and unemployment or anything. Crisis also from within the structural crisis within social science. Unless we convert social science into a human science, but perhaps one way of doing it is borrowing from people, their own sentiments and emotions which are expressed through poetry and songs. Perhaps we will be able to give a human touch to our social science studies. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Nath, for addressing the crisis of social sciences in India, and I'm sure students and research scholars who are present here will be enlightened by it. Our next speaker, Professor Joy L.K. Pachwal, is a professor in the Center for Historical Studies, JNU New Delhi. She is an eminent historian, as my already said, and her area of interest is in the European expansion in Asia in the 16th, 17th centuries, history of Christianity in India and Asia, social cultural history of Northeast India, and visual anthropology. She has authored and co-authored several research books, including Entangled Lives, Human Animal Plant Histories of the Eastern Himalayan Triangle, and also The Camera as Witness, a social history of Mizoram, Northeast India with William Pensiander. Her book, Being Mizo, was awarded the Sneha Mahajan Prize for Best Book in Modern Indian History for 2012 to 14 by the Indian History Congress 2015. She has received several awards and honors. She was awarded a Fulbright Nehru Academic Excellence Fellowship at the University of Yale 2016-17, Honorary Research Fellow, University of Liverpool 2015, Charles Wallace Visiting Fellow, Center for South Asian Studies, University of Cambridge 2013. So let us all welcome Professor Joy. Our topic is Modern Human Histories, Some Thoughts and Reflections. I believe Professor Joy may extend her time beyond her availability.
Thank you very much, Ramya, for your kind words of introduction. And I'm also very happy and privileged to be here along with my colleagues and friends, scholars, and also with amongst few students. Yes, as Ramya has said, I've been here before, and it's always, always consider it a privilege to be speaking to students in Mizoram, especially because I have never really taught here, and so it's always, I find it a great opportunity whenever I am given the opportunity to come and speak. So, I mean, I don't have much time, and I'm not going to spend too much time as well. Yesterday, everybody was blaming William for the kind of topics that that they were asked to speak, and today I too will do the same, because when I asked what am I supposed to speak on, is that speak on your latest book. So what I'm going to do today is talk about my book, this book which is called Land Scandal. But also I think it also falls within the large domain and area that we're looking at about the condition of the social sciences as a whole. And because in some senses this work enables us to go beyond the human, as the title says, in the human histories. So to go beyond the human, and yesterday Ram mentioned about the idea of the Anthropocene and how that has taken hold over the way we have written our histories. And so today I think what we're trying to do through this book is to talk about how the non-human world has actually made a mark on our lives and how we've constituted our lives. And this is especially relevant for people from the Northeast because of the way we seem to be much closer to nature, I would say, seem to be much closer to nature, but also I think on various fronts, at various levels, I think that being able to see our history through these interactions or through these entanglements with nature is important, because in the writing of our history, I'm going to start off with trying to problematize the writing of our histories in Mizoram and in the Northeast, and then go on to talk about why it is important to talk about these entanglements and how that has constituted our history, and then try and see ways in our past about how these entanglements have worked out. Okay, so that's basically what I'm going to be trying to do today. So the first thing is, as you know, in the Northeast, history writing is all about identity. It's all about, say, the Mizo identity, or if you look Naga identity, and within that, the identity of what you may call sub-tribes or tribes, depending on how you look at it, whether it's the Am Nagas, Amravi Nagas, Mizos, and among Mizos, Maras, and many other groups. And this, as a result of this, we are unable to look at our past as a past that has actually been developed as a result of interactions and communication with the wider group. We are unable to see our past as a constitution of historical contingencies. Okay? So we see our past as being something that is extremely static in some ways, that has not evolved, and we see our identity as being bounded by a territory. We consider the territory as a given. And I think there are lots of problems with writing history like that. At the same time, I know that in this day and age, especially in the context of Mizoram, there is this idea of a greater Mizo identity. or a greater, as I would say, reserve identity. Now, we have to see, and yesterday Ram gave a very, very important lecture, especially for people from the Northeast, about how the chauvinism of nationalism has contributed to, and this it is so relevant for us here because the way we see our history as greater Mizoram, and if you trace these developments, you realize that the Mizo identity for some stretches right from the Naga hills, from down there till the Jitgong hill tribe. So this expansion of the Mizo identity and attempt at historicizing those identities, those are all extremely problematic. So I think what is very, very important is therefore to think of ways in which historical contingencies have developed, how history has evolved, the evolution of various aspects of our history is something that we need to bear in mind. So in many ways, what is important is to try and conceptualize space in a different manner. So this is what this book Entangled Lives attempts to do. So we conceptualize space in a different manner, so much so that we call this region as the Eastern Himalayas, Eastern Triangle, and we try to see it as an ecological space. Not so much a space that is bounded by political boundaries, but more or less as an ecological space. Okay, so that is our attempt here. So this is the basic region that we're going to go beyond the political boundaries, as I mentioned, and I talk about the entangled lives in this particular region, that is the Eastern Himalayas, that is bounded by these Eastern Himalayas in the north, the Indo-Arakan Yoma or the Indo-Burma mountain ranges, and of course the Chittagong hill tracts. That is the particular kind of triangle that we are looking at. And in some way, it is also bounded, it is also considered a sort of distinct ecological zone as well. So we try and look at the flora and fauna of this region and look at the ways in which the flora and fauna of this region has helped in the constitution of life in the region. Okay? So I'm not going to talk too much about plants here at the moment because it's time as well. But this is the particular sort of zoogeographic zone that we're talking about, and this particular region is part of what is known as the Indo-Malian geographical zone. Now, we all know this region quite well, so I won't go into the details, but from the time of the colonial officials, we know about the variety of fauna that exists in the region, and this particular region, what we call as a triangle, has the highest mammalian and avian diversity, with around 240 and 900 species. Of course, at the same time, many of them now fall under the endangered list, and 7 of the 11 mammals listed as critically endangered from India are from the northeast. And 57 vulnerable species of birds in India. Of the 57 vulnerable species of birds in India, 42 were recorded in the triangle alone. So we also must realize that increasingly this region is an endangered zone. Now, this is this was a picture that was taken in the late 19th century, and it's that of a flying squirrel. It's very clear, but it is 26 inches across and 4 inches in length. Okay, so I don't think we get to see such big, this flying squirrel anymore. It's not part of our day-to-day lives anymore, but it was definitely found in this region. Okay, so anyway, now one of the things I want to get to the paper is that this diversity of the flora and fauna has impacted the life worlds of the inhabitants of the region. And therefore the intent is to understand this nature of the non-human relations, which is an important constitutive feature of the region. Actually, many times we take it in our stride in a certain sense, and we don't recognize how much we draw from this animal world. And for instance, in the way, for instance, the Nagas today identify themselves very often as a marker of their identity in places like these morums, which are modern morums that are built for the Hornbill Festival, as you might know. You find that the way you constitute yourself is through animals. I mean, as you can see here, there is of course a human figurine, but there is also an elephant, a monkey, and these are therefore the symbols that are employed for a cognac morum. That's another example of that, of a Santa morum, which includes reptiles as well. Okay? So this is, it is in a way a kind of self-representation. So there are also, one of the things about animals is that, certain animals take precedence in the symbolic spectrum, and it's also interesting that the precedence also changes over time. Which animal gains precedence over time? So you see that, for instance, in places like what Simmons and Simmons calls, they call it the Mithun country. Now that is evident enough, but you realize that the Mithun, or what we call the what's it called in Mizo? Sial, yeah. Sorry. The Sial is something that is only endemic to regions that are 2,000 feet above sea level. Between 2,000 feet above sea level, and I think it is about 8,000 feet. Okay, it doesn't live above that, it doesn't live below that. And it is only therefore available in the mountains of Arunachal Pradesh and then coming down into the Indo-Burma arc. So even in the northeast, it is not available everywhere, and of course it is not available in other regions of the world. So the Mithun is a particular animal, and it has, in most of these cultures, it is a very interesting animal in that it holds great symbolic value. Cultural self-identification, you realize you have a Mithun's head everywhere, but at the same time, it is a semi-domesticated animal. It is not milked. It is only used for its meat, and that also not on an everyday basis. It's only used at times of festivals and rituals as well. So in many ways, the Mithun is a very important animal for a particular region in the northeast. But then similarly, there are also animals like the snake, okay, reptiles like the snake, which are important in certain cultures, or important as well as an animal that is feared. Like for instance, among the Khasis, we all know the story about the hen, and in fact it is considered a living legend. So much so that people till today feel that there is a person who takes care of the hen, and people are scared of such people, right? So the snake is a very important, is a very fierce symbol. So this is the influence here, and the snake plays a very important role in the mythology of the Khasi, but also among the Meiteis, for instance. The Ninkhaujas, one of the symbols, they were supposed to have emerged from a snake, if I'm not mistaken, or they consider the snake an ancestor of sorts, and it forms part of the symbolism of the Ninkhauja dynasty as well. So, but then there is also an evolving importance of animals. Like for instance, today Assam is sort of identified with the rhinoceros, right? It's identified with the rhinoceros, and if you so Assam oil, you have Assam tea, all of them will have a rhino as a symbol. But this was not so in the past, because in the past elephants were more important in Assam, and in fact you have treatises in the 18th century. There is a treatise called the Hasti Vidya Ranya, if I'm not mistaken, written by Sukumar Barke, that talks about how elephants should be reared and looked after and things like that. So you see, and then of course the Ahoms actually came with horses. So when the Apuns came in the 12th, 13th century, they came with horses, but then these horses were given up, and then they took on elephants as because they were important in warfare. But in modern times, Assam is usually associated with rhinoceros. So you see that there are changing, evolving ways in which humans have sort of identified with certain animals. Now, the question is like, why therefore should we study this entanglements with animals? And this is because I think I find Brian Morse's work called Animals and Ancestors and Ethnography a very, very important work. And he says that animals have always been an essential part of our history, culture, and existence. And ever since the appearance of modern humans and human culture, humans have always lived in close proximity to animals and have shared the same life worlds. So human life has not been independent of the animal world, and in many ways the latter has also formed and made a society. So according to him, Brian Morris, that is, the nature of this relationship is not complex. It is not simple. It is complex, intimate, reciprocal, personal, and most importantly, crucially ambivalent. So I like what he said, that this relationship with animals is not always very simple. Like for instance, I think the general understanding of ourselves as people of the Northeast is that we are meat eaters. Of late, Mizos, for instance, are dog lovers and cat lovers, and there are societies nowadays that are extremely sort of possessive about taking care of dogs and cats and pets and things like that. But generally, we're seen as a sort of a meat-loving people, and that is the idea that we have of ourselves and animals. But we realize that actually, if you think about it much more carefully, we have a very, very sort of intricate and complex understanding of this animal world. Like for instance, why do we think it is necessary that at a Christmas feast we should sacrifice at least, or we should have at least, any vein that is considered as itself a vein will want to have CR rabbits, if I'm not correct, if I'm not wrong, right? Most veins in Isol, for instance, want to slaughter a CR besides the cow or the pig or whatever. So why do we consider that? Why do we have so much of sort of thing about this method? Okay, so there are things like that we have to think about and we have to consider. So I just want to trace in many ways. I'm just really rushing in here, but I just want to trace the many ways in which animals have sort of made up the life world of the people of Northeast India. And I'll give examples from among the Mizos and but also amongst other communities as well. Now, one of the things about the region is that in all our myths and origin stories, we have an animal. We have an animal. Like for instance, in the case of Mizos, we have an earthworm, which was involved in the creation of the mud. Okay, I don't know whether you all know the story. We have an earthworm that is involved in the creation of the mud. Among the Garos, it was a spider, and so there are many, many stories like that. Okay, I won't go into detail. The other thing is that many of us have considered animal as kin, as relatives. Okay, like for instance, among the Angami Nagas, the tiger, the spirit, and the human were considered siblings. Okay, so the tiger, the spirit, and the human were considered as siblings. And then one day the mother said that she was very angry at the way the tiger was eating its food. It didn't have table manners at all. So then she said that I'll throw a stick and whoever reaches that place first, they will stay at home, and the one who reaches the place second will have to stay in the jungle. So the spirit and the human collaborated, and so when the mother threw the stone, the spirit before the human could reach said that I have reached, and so therefore whereas the tiger could not speak out, obviously, and so the tiger was second in arriving at the spot. So therefore, as a result, the humans were sort of lords of the village or lord of the culture, whereas the tiger is lord of the jungle. Okay, so therefore they come to have these kind of two positions. But what is interesting, therefore, is that such myths actually, we may consider them stories, but they were what is known as a palimpsest for action. That kind of a story made people have unique relationship with the tiger. So, for instance, among the Angamites, tiger meat is never eaten. Okay, tiger meat is never eaten because the tiger is considered a sibling. Okay, so the tiger is considered a sibling. So you realize that these stories have have had an impact on the way people understood nature or related with nature. Okay, so for instance, on the other hand, the Chang Nagas could eat the flesh of the leopard but not that of the tiger. Okay, so there were those kinds of differences as well. I won't get into great detail about it. So the other thing, of course, is that what is interesting is that all these animals also sort of had an impact on how society was organized, whether in terms of gender relations, whether in terms of social hierarchy, whether in terms of status as well. Okay, so for instance, I'll give an example of, like for instance, hunting was considered a man's activity. And hunting, like for instance, amongst the Molo in Arunachal Pradesh, you had to ask the forest spirit. For permission in order to be able to hunt. And once you had permission, you could hunt. But when you hunted, the animals could not be given the same name as what they were called in the city. So the animals had to be addressed in a different sort of name. Like something quite similar is like, for instance, in Mizo, you would call the tiger Sake, but you also called it Sakwe. So you have a different name for the tiger. You call it Sakwe. So similarly, amongst the Molo in Arunachal Pradesh also, you had similar kinds of things. But what is interesting is that, like, so women of course do not go for hunt, but in certain tribes in Nagaland, for instance, or around, the women could not cook the meat of the animal that was hunted, or the women could not, or the meat had to be cooked outside the house. So and then of course we know in the Mizo sort of idea of Khangswa also that the killing of certain animals, made you have access into the afterlife, right? You have to kill a certain number of animals to be a Khangswa, and then that Khangswa gave you status as being a warrior, and also that Khangswa gave you a status in the afterworld as well, or access into the afterworld as well. So you see that this relationship with animals and with tigers and with all kinds of sort of animals is the one that is sort of creating a particular kind of view of the afterlife. It's very important in the cosmological life of people. Another example that I will give is that of the Poniaks. The Poniaks, of course, apparently you have to kill about 40 mithun in order to be able to have this similar status that we have called Khangswa. But what is interesting among the Poniaks is also that people of the chieftain's family could eat, only those people could eat certain meats, and people of the lower classes could eat certain meats. So I think, I'm just forgetting, but like for instance, the goat and bear meat could not be eaten by the commoners. Okay? So what that points out to is like, unlike say in subcontinental India, which works on notions of purity and pollution, so in similar ways there are these kinds of hierarchies that are being created, but it is hierarchies that are being created on the on access or eating of certain meats or non-eating of certain meats. Okay? So what we're trying to see here is that animals have sort of played a very, very important part in social organization and creating gender differences and things like that. So I'm going to just skip over many things that I wanted to say here. And of course, in Mithun country again, the Mithun is the highest animal sacrifice. But what I wanted to, therefore, I'll just try and conclude here now, is just to say that that non-human animals have contributed to the constitution of the people of the region, and this non-human relation perspective enables us to see the region in terms of also cultural geographies. Okay, that is the spatial dimension of more than human histories. So in many ways, these spatial dimensions have been understood traditionally in binaries such as forest people and settled agriculture, slash and burn versus settled agriculture, primitive versus civilized. But there are many other alternate spaces in the triangle which can be based on human non-human interactions. For instance, the interplay of microorganisms, animals, and plants creates spatial patterns that change over time with human and non-human mobilities. Okay? So, and some of these cultural geographies are rooted in triangle ideas and traditions, others in the imagination of outsiders. So, this region as a sort of spatial category can be imagined when we think of it in interaction with different kinds of animals, maybe microorganisms, maybe plants as well. And I'll just give you a quick two examples and then I'll stop there, which is that, in terms of microorganisms, if you think about it, most of the people in the Northeast are lactose intolerant, and we share this kind of lactose intolerance with a lot of people from East Asia as well, so which is that if you didn't know it, and if you've always felt why do you feel sort of what's the word? Oh, pardon, as you call it, a bit acidic when you drink milk? It's because of the lactose intolerance. So, and we share that kind of, and it's the lack of a microorganism that prevents you from being able to digest milk. Okay? So in that sense, you can see that we are part of a particular kind of a cultural sort of zone. The other thing is, of course, about, which I often mention, is in terms of plants, is glutinous rice. Glutinous rice or sticky rice or bun, as we call it here, is something that is not prevalent west of Northeast India. It's only cultivated in Northeast India, and we share this with the rest of Asia, Eastern Asia as well. So in many, so if you think about this region in terms of these kinds of cultural spaces, you realize that we share continuities with, or spatial continuities with people from other regions or regions in Asia as well. So I think I have a lot more to say, but I think since we're running short of time, it's already 11:15, I will stop there. But I just want to conclude by saying that that we need to consider these kinds of entanglements that we've had, whether it is with plants or whether it is with animals in our history. We have to consider the evolving nature of these entanglements, and these entanglements enable us to see space in different ways. We move beyond our political boundaries, we move beyond our preconceived notions of difference across boundaries, and we're able to see spatial continuities based on these kinds of interactions that we've had. So I'll stop here, and maybe when we have questions, we can deal with them later. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor Joy, for enlightening us of man's important relation to our nature and environment, and also the importance of conceptualizing space as an ecological space. I'm sure that many people would like to give, to react or give responses to the two lectures, but with the constraints of time, I shall not open the floor for discussion, and we will, in a short time, start the proposed panel discussion, which I have already announced earlier. Now, before I wind up this session, I would like to introduce one of our panelists for the panel discussion. Sanjoy Hazarika. I would like to introduce Sanjoy Hazarika. Sanjoy Hazarika is an author, journalist, filmmaker, policy analyst, and human rights advocate. Hazarika, an alumni of St. Edmund's College in Ceylon, studied journalism and printing in London, and later joined the New York Times. He reported from across South Asia, including Afghanistan, Pakistan, Nepal, Sri Lanka, and India, including the Northeast. He has held fellowships at Harvard, Tufts, University of Kentucky, and the Rockefeller Center at Bellagio. Hazarika is a columnist and author of 5 books, including acclaimed Strangers of the Mist and its successor, 25 years later, Strangers No More. He also co-edited several books, including Hope Behind Bars on prison survivors, as well as Japan and Northeast India, Engagement Through Connectivity. He has contributed to several anthologies and has just completed a travelogue on the Brahmaputra and is working on a new book on the Northeast. Between 2016 to 22, he was International Director of the Commonwealth Human Rights Initiative. And he earlier founded the first Center for Northeast Studies at the Central University at Zamia Millia Islamia, New Delhi. Hazarika started a non-government organization, Center for Northeast Studies and Policy Research, in 2000, and is regarded as an authority on the region and its neighborhood. He designed a flagship program of both clinics on the Brahmaputra, now rolled out with the National Health Mission. His current work is closely engaged with issues relating to rivers, ecosystems, and community, as well as migration, climate uncertainty, and its impacts on governance and livelihoods. Hazarika has produced over a dozen documentaries, including on the Brahmaputra River and about governance and conflict. So we again will welcome Sanjoy Hazarika. He was also present yesterday. And I shall wind up this session, and we will immediately start the panel discussion. And for that, I would like to request the moderator, Professor Duncan McDewey-Ra, to take his chair. Thank you all.
Thank you, everybody. I want to make the most of this time, so I won't have a long preamble. Ram and I have conspired already. He and I got to speak yesterday, so we'd like to really get some input from Sanyal, Joy, Sanjoy, and then I'll be Ram at the end for some other questions. But we'll see how the conversation goes. I will remind everyone, I'm a very authoritarian moderator. I snatch the mic back if we talk too long. And I don't want to do that very tiresome thing where I ask a question and everyone feels like they need to respond to it. What I'd like to do is direct some specific questions, and then if anyone here has any point they want to add to that, I think that's the best way to handle a little bit of the time we have. Because Sanyal and Joy did get the opportunity for questions, I hope I might sort of steal that first, and then I want to go to Sanjoy. So I just have a very simple question for you. You know me, I'm always trying to think about future things, right? Jumping in future things. So Joy, I really want to come to you first, and hopefully you can pick up where you left off at the end of the talk here. So in Entangled Lives, you do a number of things, right? You talk about histories of entanglement, but you also talk about alternative spatial and cosmological imagining. I'd just like to push you to project that forward a little bit, right? And if someone is trying to research a similar thing, look at knowledge production in an interspecies way, 20 years down the line, where do you think they're going to be with thinking of these entanglements? So I'm just going to throw that one to you now.
I have to be a bit of a seer for that. But yeah, I mean, like I said, plants and I mean non-human world is accessed upon by people for different purposes. You know, it's not just a kind of material relationship that you have, but I think. I mean, at one level with environmental degradation, and especially the Northeast and Mizoram, especially in our loss of the habitat, I think it's going to be much more sort of pertinent, you know, and I think that at one level there's going to be a lot of symbolic value that is attached to our flora and fauna, but at the same time, I don't know, I think, you know, as we all know in Mizo society, the church plays a very important role in the way we have perspective, I mean, you know, how it predicates our way of thinking. So depending on how the church sort of, you know, brings in the environment into the rationale into their theology, I think that will have an impact on the way Mizos as a whole also try and understand the natural world around us. For instance, you know, in the book we spoke about how, you know, the hornbill, you know, which is hardly seen in Mizoram today, is, I mean, even in other parts of the Northeast as well, is becoming such an important identifying marker, you know, the hornbill. And we don't see it anymore today. So it is a commodification of a bird for identity purposes. And we have a hornbill festival which also capitalizes this. So I think it's going to depend a lot on all these factors like the church, the environmental degradation that we've seen today, you know, I don't know whether artificial intelligence and all of that will also impact the way we have a relationship with the non-human world as well. Okay, so broad sort of things that maybe more to think about.
Thank you. Sorry, it was a bit of an unfair question, but I do think that we want to hesitate that these relationships are not just tradition. They're not just relegated to tradition, but they're an important part of contemporary and future worlds too, which I think is really important. Sonia, I wanted to ask you many questions because your work spans so many different things, from missionaries to rebels to what you were talking about today. But maybe because you did make a comment in your talk about this being a very conflict-affected region, and we seem to go through periods, and I'm going to bring you in on this in a second, we seem to go through periods where we think, oh, this is a period of relative stability, and then something else will happen. So I just wanted your thoughts on do we allow ourselves to think this is endemic, or do we allow ourselves to think that there is a possibility that things will sustain peace at some point in time, and what factors you think are relevant in that scenario?
Thank you. About 6 months back, there was a seminar organized by Histories Society, Calcutta, and the theme was the same, that what happened to all these disturbances in North Asia? What happened? Yeah, yeah. So people came out with different social categories, different explanations. I said yes, certainly all the secessionist movements have disappeared, all the organizations have come to negotiating table. Things seem as if, as if when the new government comes and everything kind of, disappears, and suddenly others feel, oh, other government did not do the same thing, that is why. If they had done the same thing, it would have gone wrong by now. Then, in my presentation, I felt, and I said that all these are dissenting voices, or whatever in the form. Sometimes it takes the form of conflict, sometimes challenge, sometimes crisis. These dissenting voices, marginal voices, the space for dissenting voices has suddenly disappeared. Just yesterday, there was a post in Facebook, and one Assamese lady, she was saying that I want to say something to my countrymen, meaning Assamese, her Assamese fellows. She said, we have fought against CA, that is CAA, for a long time, and the date was announced 2-3 days back. We burst out there in front of my house in Guwahati, there was the burning of vehicles and all that, and suddenly it just disappeared. And suddenly after that, nothing is happening. She's asking, does it mean that we are happy with CA now, we have accepted it? And that is why there is no dissent. There is no opposition to that, but there was a time when last time CA was announced, there was almost 6 months long agitation. And then the Prime Minister visited, in fact he was shown the black flag there, but it was in a month when election was held, which comes to power. And she says that, it's very meaningful, I don't know whether it is still there in the Facebook, that she says, it's not that we have accepted it, or because something which jeopardizes our future, how can we accept it as that? But the state machinery has imposed such a fear psychosis among us, because we are all family people. We can't afford to go to jail or have to fight, and that is why people are afraid. They are not coming out, but inside we are burning. We are burning, we feel, how can our own government do ourselves? So that's what I said, that dissenting voice, suddenly that space got shrunk. And the myth that there was peace, and which is going to be long and running is first by the Manipur episode. That it was dormant, and whenever things doesn't go according to the plans, these conflicts will burst out. Manipur is one case. Assam for the time being has been suppressed, but we do not know. I have a feeling that more, as soon as the dissenting voice the space is shrunk, and that is why they are not doing, but people will force out of it. Because dissenting voice is one such voice which cannot be stopped for long. That is what history tells us. And I think no, it is not ending. Unless you have enduring solutions to this problem, this is going to come back like the way Manipur has come back.
I was in Unified last January. Similar to you, city I used to know very well, worked on it, booked on. And I had this strange, this is very oddly peaceful, right? it's almost like your conference, you know, as soon as you have that thought, you think, oh no, I've done that thing where now surely something will unravel. Sanjay, I want to come to you on this similar topic. We talked on the way here about some of the shifts in language and the way the central government has I guess, channeled some of these changes into the region to try and subdue some of this opposition and agitation towards the region there. So I wonder whether you could talk about where the region finds itself in that relationship in the contemporary moment and how that affects things like activism, agitation, opposition.
Thanks. I think what's increasingly happening is a series of, and just pick up on what Sajjad was saying, a series of things. Just because dissent is either silenced or silent doesn't mean it's gone. Just because an issue is not discussed doesn't mean the issue has not gone away. I think a few days ago there was a remembrance of the March 5 strapping of Vizor. Many of us obviously were not around at that time. But these histories remain embedded in our psyche, in our parents' memories. And to come, so whatever the government or governments may say, some of these issues remain very deep within us. And it takes some time for them to come out. But coming to your issue of the way language is used, narratives, new narratives are used to actually reframe certain situations. So 2 years ago, the government announced that AFSPA was being removed from large parts of the northeast. You know the AFSPA. I don't need to explain the Armed Forces Special Powers Act, which was used very extensively in Mizoram, Nagaland, Manipur, and Assam, to a little bit in Tripura. Well, the fact of the matter is the AFSPA has been removed in the sense that it's been taken away in a way from public discourse. It's sitting on the sideline where our friend is sitting, controlling the sound. If he wishes, he can switch off my mic. So it's over there. It's not here. It's not sitting on the stage. So AFSA is removed without being repealed. It's a very clever way of addressing an issue. And I spent about 1 or 2 in the morning writing an article on the CAA. And there is a nuancing there which is being developed, which is trying to separate the two, the NRC, the National Register of Citizens in Assam, from the CA, because it's extremely complicated. And the line that is being given, which is difficult to counter, is that, look, all of you were fearful. There's nothing to fear. This is how it is. It's just for these poor illegal migrants who came fearing death to life and liberty, and that's all there is. So, but there is a very interesting pushback. And the pushback is coming in terms of new writing, novels which are being written, and I'm not just talking about Mizoram, but across the region, people are finding voice and resonance in the kind of new literature that is coming out in fiction, not just non-fiction, in fiction. If I take a new book which has come out just a few days ago called Red River, it is about the time of insurgency in Assam, of crackdown by the government, but also it brings in Bhutan and Bangladesh into the story. It's actually quite a remarkable tour de force. So narratives are being perhaps imposed, but narratives are also being revisited and resisted. So I think that's important, even though the media may not even see it.
Yeah, even though the form might be different to what we've seen previously, it seems. So that's I think, an interesting time because you made this point about March 5th, right? So Joy, if I can come to you about, in being Mizo, one of the things I really took from it was about memory and memory practices, community memory and cultural memory practices. And one of the things that I'm always interested in is how public memory works in different societies and mental things. And so I wondered whether you could speak a little bit, I know I'm taking you back to some of your earlier work, about in Mizoram, in this society, how sort of public memory of past figures, past events, past struggles sort of operates, how you would explain that to an outsider like me.
Yeah. I remember Sajal and I were at a conference several decades ago here in Aizol, and that was one of the earlier conferences that we had on, memorializing the Ramwai. I can't remember which year that was. And I was quite surprised that there were 2 or 3 kinds of strands that were sort of articulated at that conference, if I remember correctly. One was, there were pastors in that, of course, there were academics, and then there were civil servants, retired civil servants. And so there were 2 or 3 kinds of voices that operated at that, if I recollect it correctly. One was the pastor's point of view, and he's no more now, very prominent view, which was forgive and forget. What has happened, and let us forget all these things. It's no point remembering these things, and it just evokes fresh emotions, new emotions. So let's just forget about it. So that's one thing that was the strand. Then there was of course a very, very vocal strand about the need to memorialize that. And I found that kind of need was emerging essentially from people from outside the state at that point of time. From outside the state, people were the ones who were saying we have to memorialize it and we have to remember it and things like that. And the third strand, which I found on when I was doing my research on the Ramwai as well, was that when people actually suffer, they find it very difficult to articulate. So when I asked people, what was your experience? Like, my own family lost an uncle, he was beaten up by the army, and then I have relatives in villages which were grouped together and they had to move out. And the only thing that they said was, it was just too difficult. But going beyond the articulation of it, when you say difficult, what does that mean? And things like that. Very often people are unable to articulate it. So I often find this paradox, I think, at one level, which is that the people who suffer are very often the people who are unable to articulate it. And it is usually people who are from the outside, who want to put that into language and try and express that as well. So I find that happening. Now, of course, then there is, so I think my response to you is that it is extremely complicated. And now, of course, there is a politics of remembering as well, which and whom do you remember also? Because I think that's something that I noted in my work, being his own other articles that I've written, which is that it is a politics between, at least at that point in time, between the Congress and the MNF. So that politics also plays into how the period has to be remembered as well. So without getting into great details about that, I think, so there are, any period of insurgency or difficulty or insurrection, I think there are different strands that one has to sort of bring to, keep in mind, I think, because there's not just one narrative we can talk about.
Thank you. That's a very thoughtful answer. And I think it's very interesting for those of you who know Joy's work, and I'm sure you all do. How you then go to Camera's Witness, which is much more about personal memories and how they're shared and archived over time privately, which is a very fascinating contrast. Do you want to add to this one?
Yeah, very glad you made this point about remembering and the difficulty of speaking an experience which is almost unspeakable. Because I made this, colleague and I made this film called Rumba. Based on struggle here, it's been screened at a legal copy college, so you can see it at some point. One of the things that struck me, I was talking to Buddha Kam, the former chief secretary, and asked him, unlike other states, whether it's Manipur, Nagaland, or Assam, there is no resurgence of an effort at confronting the state. He says people went through such hell, sorry to use the expression, such trauma, that they will never go through that again. They never want to go through that again. When you had your homes burned, you'll be forced to march to a new center, you'll be grouped to village, find new tomb or try to survive. You know, these are things that people will never forget. And I'm sure you know that two-thirds of the population of Mizoram was moved from their villages to new villages in that period of 67 to 69 regrouping. So this is a collective trauma, not just an individual trauma. And the thing that I remember the last point here before, right? And is once we showed the film, after the film there was a lot of silence for a few minutes, and then people asked questions. And one of the young persons got up and said that, you know, these are new stories to us because our parents have never told us these stories. And the story from the parents was that we wanted to protect our children from understanding or going through what we do.
Yeah, just add to what Joy and Sanjay has. You know, in that conference that Joy mentioned, 2009 was probably. The best part was some of the army who were involved and the bureaucrats like Jaffa, who was involved in this entanglement, came and saw several representatives and talked against it. And that moving account by one of the army officers who had, who said that I was ordered, I don't remember the village, ordered to burn the village and move the people from one village. And he said, I was reluctant to do it, but I was duty bound, I did it. I went and asked people to come out, burn the village, and then said that you move on now. And then suddenly he saw one little girl rush into her burning house, and everybody was scared that she'll get burned. Then she came out with a little kitten, that she wanted to leave the kitten behind. This is a moving story by an army man. So this is one best thing. Those who were in charge of this, committing this, or perpetrating this trauma on the people, themselves were repenting. One thing. And these papers, they never published it. Some of them were with us, with me. The other PhD thesis that done by the Australian lady, which is also available on the impact of women on grouping, that is also available on the internet. Very, very moving stories. What I'm saying, these kind of memories, be it Holocaust, be it partition, be it Ramboy, or the same thing in Nagaland, or in Chhattisgarh, these stories don't come out immediately. That's what I think. But I know entire party, there is a huge corpus of partition literature. I myself come from a partition displaced family. My mother and father talks about it, but they never write. They feel no, I will not be able to write. And I've been insisting so much, I said, finally, I said, you tell me the story, I want to write something. They don't want to write about it. Some of the Ramboy compositions I have quoted, there are many more available in Mizo language. I wish some of you translate them for the greater community. Obviously do it, nobody is going to do it. Please do it. So by and by, I think, however much we wish that these trauma, experiences of trauma, transform into literary, composition by be it novel, be it poetry, be it folk song, it will come out by and by. The experience of Holocaust, most of the Holocaust movies are coming now. It did not come out in the Second World War period. Partition stories, now there are one or two partition stories, now there is a whole genre of them. And now we tell Sula and others writing about grouping system and their impact on people. So now it is coming out. So this literature will come out, and I think I exhort the young people who are working, who are especially from literature and history people, please do translate those before they are lost.
And that's such a wonderful point. And I think you're right about this generational time. The healing time is really important. In my own family, my father-in-law was Korean, in the Korean War. He never mentioned it to my wife, but now to his granddaughter, he starts to talk about it, right? And it's we're the same. Like, we want to get this bloody remember, but we also don't want to push. So if I may change tack a little bit, so I'm from Australia, as you all know, and missionaries are a really huge part of what shaped colonization in Australia. They're a huge part of how areas were named, how things were organized and done, why existing denominations are placed where they are. So I'm always fascinated when I come to Aizawl in particular, that we see statues to missionary sites or Sapu. Sapu is one of the first words I learned. Aizawl, because everywhere I walk, you just go Sapu. So I always remember him, right? Yet in Australia, for example, missionary histories are now very much problematized. It's very tricky territory. It's very challenging territory, especially for Indigenous Australians. Yet here, obviously, there's a reverence that continues to persist. And so I wanted to throw a question to Ram about our missionary number one in many senses, very Ellen. And really to think about sort of contemporary life in the region as you see it, and whether you think his legacy is evident in what we see today.
Yeah, so, it's, thank you, Duncan. First of all, it's a misnomer that Elvin was a missionary. He actually never converted a single person. He was a Christian, but then he left the church. And it's mostly right-wing Hindu ideologues who call him a missionary, including the Chief Minister of Assam, who still blames Elvin, who will be dead 60 years, for any problems that remain in the Northeast. So I think Elvin's legacy was probably, and he was, in this region, he was responsible most for Arunachal. And of course, there's one aspect of his legacy that is enduring, which is that in Arunachal, he promoted Hindi as the lead language, not Assamese, which is what some people want. It's interesting that everyone in Arunachal speaks Hindi, and Arunachal also hasn't had an insurgency, which is kind of significance. But the other aspect of Elvin's legacy, which links to Joy's talk, and I'd like to say a little bit about that, is that Elvin actually was an early environmentalist. He talked, if you look at his, Elvin essentially was ethnographer of the Adivasis of Central India. His knowledge of northeastern tribals was limited. He came there late in life, he didn't know the languages, he came as a government official, so he, there's a barrier of trust. But he spent 20 years in Central India, 22 years, working as a full-time anthropologist. And many of his works are about the role of forests and animals in Adivasi culture, And I think Joy's talk was very interesting from that point of view, because, the connection between particular species and particular clans, particular tribes. Now, I think this is something which, you talk about the disappearance of the Hornbill. Now, I think this is something which the Northeast, as the non-human element in the Northeast, fauna as well as flora, but let's speak about fauna because that's what John talked about. The extraordinary diversity of bird and mammalian life in the Northeast, which still remains. And the threats to it. So in Arunachal, of course, which is one of the biodiversity hotspots of the world, it is roads and dams. Now, maybe roads are needed because India is in a conflict situation with China, and China has built roads on its side right up to the border, and maybe India wants self-defense these roads. But dams are much more problematic. I think dams historically have been shown to be large hydroelectric projects are not good for a hill region. I mean, in Uttarakhand, which is an area I know well, you look at, the earthquake and the devastation of dams, and also they're not cost effective. They're basically a means of awarding contracts, politicians awarding contracts to contractors who give them kickbacks to find elections. I mean, there's no real economic justification for building large dams. I mean, there are other ways of bringing energy more safe, secure, and even cost effective, and certainly less environmentally destructive manner. So I think part of Elvin was actually someone who talked about, responsible attitude towards nature, I mean animals, and he was like an early prophet of what we would call sustainability. And I want to just say one thing, then I want to change that a bit if I may, about Joy mentioned the elephant. Now, the Northeast, which is, I'm not sure what Mizoram, but certainly Arunachal, Assam, Tripura, and Meghalaya have very large populations of wild elephants. This area, maybe only in the south, you have Tamil Nadu, Kerala, and Karnataka, which have comparable populations. And there is, I don't know how many of you know, but 2 years ago, the Wildlife Protection Act was amended to exempt elephants, to allow elephants being traded. Elephants are an endangered species. Elephants are a sacred species to many tribal communities, to Hindus. They are a sacred species. But this amendment was made to allow elephants to be traded. And another amendment in the Act was to allow a private zoo, the creation of private zoos. Now, in theory, you and me can start a private zoo, except if we don't have the money. This amendment to the Wildlife Protection Act of 2 years ago, allowing private zoos and allowing elephants to be traded, was to enable the creation of the Ambani Zoo in Jamnagar. And it's an extraordinary scandal. Recently the youngest son got married, right? Now, pre-marriage. Now, if in a engagement ceremony or in a wedding ceremony, you want to lavishly spend your money, I'm okay with it. It's their money. They want to spend millions of dollars, that's fine. But the amendment of the Act, the creation of a private zoo, the illegal transportation of elephants. Now, this scandal is just coming up. I wrote a short column on it last week, but there's a much longer essay coming by an investigative journalist in the journal Demand, which shows how that the entire government machinery, all the forest officers, they are promised post-retirement jobs by their money. It's an unbelievable scandal. It's a mother of all ecological scandals, and it should transport wild elephants to Jamnagar, which is an arid area in which elephants are not supposed to live. So I think this is something which will affect the Northeast, the biodiversity and the kind of intangible heritage, the more than human heritage of the Northeast, which we must be aware of. That's the power the Ambanis have. They can change the laws completely to gratify the wish of one spoiled boy who wants 1,000 elephants. Because it has been said that the astrologer told him, if you got 1,000 elephants will become very successful. Now, this is something that, there's an organized trade, a smuggling of elephants from Assam, from Tripura, from Arunachal. It's tougher from Karnataka and Kerala because they have somewhat better protection. So I think this is so when you talk about elephants legacy, I think the organic link between people and the natural environment, and how the natural environment sustains them, how the non-human environment sustains them economically, culturally, spiritually, and of course, in modernity we lose that generally. But what the new threats to are, including in the form of this Ambani Zoo. That's the second thing I wanted to say, that if I may return to the whole issue of conflict and insurgency. Now, in this panel, I am the only Northeast expert. I mean, I've never really worked as a scholar on the Northeast, only indirectly I've worked on Edwin, who spent a few years here. I read the history of India, which meant dealing inevitably with the Naga insurgency and the Mizo insurgency, but not in terms of India itself, the kind Joy has done, Sanjoy has done, you has done. But I want to say a little bit about Manipur. Because when we talk about the apparent peace in the Northeast, and the apparent absence for the first time in many decades of any major insurgency, what is happening in Manipur is unprecedented in the history of independent India. That there is a full-fledged divide between one section of the state and another section of the state. A divide that is geographical, valley versus hills, that is ethnic, that is religious, that is ideological, and it is a civil war within the state. Now, this is never happened in any state. No, of course, there have been conflicts within the states. Joy talked about, maybe Mizoram, different type of communities. In Nagaland, it's better known between the Anghamis and the rest. In Meghalaya, where Sajan and Sanjoy live between the Khasis and the Garos. But a full-fledged civil war, where both sides are armed, where the state armory has been looted, and thousands of arms with the connivance of the government, the central government and the state government, are now in the hands of ordinary people fighting it out. And where a vigilante group like the American vigilante group can get the evidence to take vows of a certain kind. Now this is actually much worse than an insurgency. Because insurgency, when the MLF or the NSU or the Ulfa launched an insurgency, you knew who you were dealing with. The state could kind of negotiate, could bring them to the table, set certain conditions. But within a state, there is this kind of civil war. And the central government is encouraging. I mean, there's nothing to stop it. To the contrary, it thinks, what in my view, this is my personal view, and I don't think I'm wrong. Why has the Prime Minister and the Home Minister allowed the situation to fester in Manipur? Why have they given control to the Chief Minister, Biren Singh, and let him do what he wants? My view is, it is because they are civically using the civil war in Manipur, allowing the fester to become more divisive and dangerous, so that they can paint the cookies as Christians and foreigners and mobilize Hindus in the heartland for the election. That is the game. It's a very creepy and evil game. And the consequence is a entire division of the state. I mean, I don't know, Sanjoy, you know the area so well. Has there ever been a kind of situation in any state in India? Not even in Punjab in the 80s, not even in Kashmir, but two sections, large sections of the state were so absolutely implacably divided. I mean,
well, the simple answer is no. I mean, you have a situation where people are displaced and they're coming here, they're going to Shillong, they're going to Guwahati. I mean, I personally know a large number of these people who've come on both sides who are friends, and I sympathize with their situation. I mean, the situation is so difficult and challenging, as many of you will know. Where I think I was telling you this, there's a scholar, a teacher in Guwahati at one of the universities, and she was watching she and her husband were watching this television news, and suddenly the news was in Manipur last year, and suddenly she says, "That's my student." And he was in full uniform with an AK-47 or AK-56. And he was mobilizing the village groups in his area. And he later called her and said, "I've stopped studying. This is where I have to fight for my community." So this is, as we all are aware, just because we're not talking about an issue, doesn't mean it goes away. it festers, and as both as Saturday said, it could explode. And the thing is that you have what's close to a civil war in Manipur, but you have a civil war across the border in Myanmar. So you have two civil wars going, and in one it's a full-fledged army which is fighting against 8 or 10 insurgent. I mean, we can't even call them insurgent, but ethnic armies who've been fighting Yangon for the last 60, 70 years. And on this side, there is a different flow. So, in terms of national security, and one of the country's top army officers said, I don't understand this, because this is a national security threat. And if you don't take it seriously, it could impact, and is impacting on the other states. So that's as simple as that. When you say cynical handling or manipulation of the situation, what is more important is a state's safety and security, the security of its people. All this feeds into each other. Everything feeds.
I think to pick up to your earlier points on ways too is that USPA may be shelved, right? But that doesn't mean a reduction in troop numbers. In fact, we've seen an increase in GP in one class of the region, and it also doesn't really change the kind of long-term culture of militarization and impunity, right? So the lifting of an act is sort of not lifting, so not repeal, but I'm going to say rescinding, but you would say is celebrated. Look at this progress towards peace that the previous government could never achieve. But yet, the reality on the ground is not very different, right? And in fact, it's worse because of the escalation in troop numbers, etc., etc. So maybe on that last point, maybe Joy, if I can cross back to you. It's not exactly a fair question, but we do see. You alluded in your talk, and you have certainly done some other work about at least the imagination of a greater territorial community, right? That is outside contemporary borders and boundaries. And it feels as if at the present moment, particularly in this city, that imagination is being called upon more and more for help, for relief, etc. So I wonder how you feel about the durability of that idea and how it maintains through kind of crisis or a sort of greater Zoll or a greater community.
Yeah, that's a very difficult question. I don't know how to answer it. So I was talking to the driver of my taxi that was coming up from Lane the other day, and of course talking with other people as well. It's a complicated issue. That's why I don't know how to articulate it very well. But I think we have to recognize that there are two sort of strands with regard to the idea of a greater Mizoram or a greater, larger macro identity amongst the so-called, amongst the Mizo groups. And one is, of course, there is, especially from non-governmental organizations, there is a great push towards this larger macro identity. And everybody seems to be talking about this official sort of narrative. But if you talk to people at an individual level, you realize that there is also a lot of opposition to it as well. And many people are extremely skeptical about the implications of this larger, broader narrative. So I think that it is a situation that is at some point going to implode, because like in many places, a long time ago, there was this Albanian Kosovo crisis, and I happened to be, go there for some relief work. And one of the things that was very problematic over there also was that when the Kosovars were moving into Albania, they found that the Kosovar Albanians were much more qualified than the Albanians, because Albania, as you know, was under the Ceausescu, and it was very, Albania was under the and so it was extreme, it lacked development, and they found that the people coming over from Albania were much more developed. And so even though they welcomed them, there was a recognition that they were Albanians together, but yet there was a growing resentment because a lot of the refugees at that point in time that was coming to the Kosovo refugees as well. So I think, there is an implied understanding amongst a lot of people in Mizoram that people who are coming from Manipur are much more educationally qualified in many ways. And so therefore in future, I don't know how far it lasts, but there could be possible resentment at this in this growing crisis that's happening. So that's one. The second thing, I directly related to the question that you're talking about, but the official narrative has often said that we people were always united from time immemorial, and it is the British that has divided us. It's the British that has brought these boundaries and we have divided, so we should be united now. And I think one has to, if one wants to construct a larger unity, that's fine. But one should not use a false historical narrative to construct it. I think that is very, very important. Because if we think about our histories, we were always fighting against each other. This idea of a national identity never existed in time immemorial. So we have to recognize that. I think it's very, very important to recognize that. And secondly, I think I just want to end the question to say that is it colonialism, in fact, that created this idea of being a larger ethnic community? It's actually colonialism that created this idea of a greater unity rather than colonialism having divided us. So I think that is also something that we need to think about and consider. Because, for instance, the very idea that we all belong to the same language group, this was brought in by Grierson and others, who placed all of us within one language group, and things like that. So there are many ways in which you can sort of deconstruct this official narrative as well. And if one wants to build a greater unity, I think there should be other narratives that operate in favor of that rather than building upon false historical narratives.
Can I just add to that? Yeah. I would urge those of you who are studying history and those who are not studying history to also read the work of David Siembe on the Crown Colony. Because at the time of independence, some British officials, including Governor of Assam, Robert Reed, actually played with the idea, or not just played with it, but developed the idea and put it into official records that there should be a Crown Colony as a buffer zone of all the tribal states, which would retain separate legal status from the rest of India, which would become independent. And this would be starting from the Arunachal Hills, through the Naga Hills, Mizoram, Chittagong Hill Tracts, into the Chin area and parts of Nagaland. All that area would be under the British on the White Hawk. And luckily, of course, that didn't come to pass. So it's important what you've just spoken about, of the colonial construct, that these things have a role in a very large measure in both in the public imagination and in official records. That's one. The second thing is, I just want to clarify a point, because we've been talking a little bit about civil war and so on. The civil war, definition of civil war is really when the security forces, the military forces, the police forces of a country, for instance, the Balkans, what you had, was essentially the forces being divided on the basis of religion, ethnicity, and their own sense of nationality, and essentially fighting each other. Now, in Manipur, that hasn't happened yet. There is division. The issue has come close to conflagration at times, but it hasn't happened yet, and let's hope it doesn't. So we need to just keep that clarification in mind.
I wonder then, we have 15 minutes, right? Is that correct?
Can you go on to one if you want?
Oh, no, it's okay, it's okay. We are old, now we'll fall asleep if we go out. I just wondered if we were allowed to open up to questions from the audience, right? Because they've been very patient, they've listened to a lot, and I think with the time left, I think that would be a good use of the time. Because we've read many things, many difficult things, many interesting things, and I think that it would be good to give a chance to the audience to ask some questions. So, is there so are you able to do microphone duties, or is it?
There are psychologists amongst us. Enlighten us from the psychological point of view, the period from where a person recovers and could tell his or her story. From psychologists, we have psychologists amongst us. Can you please tell us the psychological aspect of dealing with young boy? Can you tell me? Understood.
And also, if there's any other questions, if you could just raise your hand, and I'll try and sort of take a mental note of where people are. Okay. Question? They didn't want to answer that question, which I can cut. Any questions? Please be brave. We are all very nice people. Anything, it doesn't have to be about what we've discussed. You can ask us anything you like. About whether there are enough trees in Aizawl, I can answer that no. But I'm surprised at the ones that are here growing up with concrete and things, but yeah.
No question.
No questions? Nothing. We've answered all problems. Okay, great.
Go ahead.
Hello. Hello, I'm Joshua. I'm a dance choreographer and doing my own cultural arts research. And so thank you for moderating. We need to learn from ecological ways of how people study animal movement. How can we do that with languages, with the people? But also there's this growing sense of building identities within Mizo's. As you said, there's this greater Mizo identity. And also across these states, like identity politics is also really coming up. You see here in universities as well, everyone's writing on identity politics. Is there a danger to not danger, sorry. Is there a possibility of the people accepting these cross-border, beyond-border identifications that goes beyond these Mizo identities? And also, my other question is there's all these histories that we have, that maybe my grandfather knows, or maybe my mom might know, but our generation doesn't get to hear so much. What's the role of, what's the importance of officiating these things in the curriculum, not just in the university level, but how can we bring these conversations, I don't know, with governments or with the education department, how can we bring these histories through the curriculum? Is there a push for that, or is there a need, or how do we address this going into the future so that there's not so much forgetting?
Yeah, so very good questions. Thank you for that, Joshua. And I'll answer the second one first, which is quite simple in a way, which is that by writing, I suppose, so I think, as somebody had already mentioned, it's very important to write. But I must also say that, and this is sort of not known to the non-Mizo audience, which is that in Mizoram, there are two things, if I may say so. One is everybody makes a music video, which and the second thing is, so many people write, there's so much of Mizo work in Mizo, which is very different from other northeastern states. There's so much of material. Okay? Now the only problem with that kind of writing is that it doesn't follow the steps that Professor Ram spoke about yesterday, which is it suffers from all those points that you had mentioned, you know. So I think it's very, very important to continue to write, of course, but also to develop the craft of history writing in a way in which it makes sense of, obviously, the interpretation, the logical reasoning, the fact that it has to be bereft of chauvinism and all the other points that Professor Guha had mentioned. So I think this is something that we need to do. Okay? Now the other, I mean, we can go on and on about all the kind of problems that we as Mizos face, like for instance in education, and this huge divide between writing and our education all being in English, but our inability to articulate in English, and you know, articulation, oral articulation is done in Mizo, but we can't. So all those problems are there, which we have to circumvent and try and circumvent. But we have to get proper writing, you know. I think that's very, very important. And of course, for the time being, even if you can't write, I think maybe it's good to start out with recording what your grandparents have to say, recording what you know, older people you think who are important will be able to help you saying it. Okay, so that's one thing. Now the other thing is, yes, even me, whenever I write about the Northeast, it always boils down to identity, whether it is a narrow Mizo identity or a greater Mizo identity. And to a certain extent, even in entangled lives, even though we're thinking about entanglements, it always comes down to identity again, how people identify themselves with love. So in a certain sense, it's very difficult to move away from the idea of identity, but I think what is important is to recognize that there are what is known in history as historical contingencies. There is not just one straight narrative that is creating identity. There are so many historical contingencies. Like, if you read, sorry, just when I do this, I'm getting names. What is the name of this Mizo Chansin? Liangkhaya. Yeah, if you look at Liangkhaya's work, for instance, one of the first Mizo pastors, historians who wrote about the Mizo history, it's like, you know, like Mizos developed from one straight line, you know, like in one narrative, you know, in the sense. But you have to recognize that identity is the result of various kinds of historical contingencies, and what we've been trying to do here is to try and see the various sort of contingencies that have been involved in the creation of that identity. So I think I don't know whether that has answered your question, Joshua, but I think we have to kind of, you know, develop that much more, and it has to be interdisciplinary for one, you know, and things like that. I think.
I just want to make a comment on that last point in answer to your question too, is that I think that we assume identity politics is everywhere in the Northeast, because that's all we go looking for, right? We assume that's everyone's starting point, especially with young people. I've done lots of work with young people from the Northeast here and in other parts of India living together. And there's all kinds of things that like both transcend divisions, right? Moments of solidarity, helping each other. Finding an Arunachali who can speak Hindi to help you deal with the vegetable wall, all these kind of strange situational solidarity. But one of the reasons I'm very interested in subculture in the region is that might be people's dominant identity. Their sort of ethnic or community identity isn't constant, it doesn't kick in all the time everywhere, which is why religion is really important, which is why sort of subculture and interests and arts and other things are really interesting. One of the disciplines that seems to have bypassed this region is cultural studies, you know, which really reshaped the academy in the West during the 1980s and 90s. But we seem to only be able to talk about culture here as ethnic culture. We don't seem to be able to talk about culture in any other ways. You know? And I think it's very important that it's dominant, it's powerful, it's important, it's constantly talked about. But we also only look for it. We don't look for its breakdowns, its alternatives, its disjunctures. And there's just this whole kind of world of sort of research waiting there for people to. Rather, did you want to comment on this? I can see you in my peripheral vision. I didn't know you were there. This is the difficulty of speaking and moderating. But it's a very fantastic question, and I think that your answer to it is really important. It's hard to escape, but it doesn't have to be everything. And I think that's crucial. Any other questions? Joshua's question is very brave. Yes, there's another question there. Are you able to get the microphone?
I'm doing a research on, my research has to do with media and nationalism. I'm a scholar from Mizoram University. And as part of my research, I went through the media coverage of the Rangwai, the famine, and also the bombing and the incidents that took place at that time. And what I found was that the coverage was very one-sided, and everything that was spoken about here was that the people here are terrorists and nothing about the background struggle. But somehow it feels like that happened many years ago, but till today there's marginalization of the media, especially in the Northeast. So I just wanted your thoughts about this, maybe from Professor Sajanak and Mr. Sanjay.
That's an excellent question. Who would like to go first?
Yeah. First thing is, you said there is a one-sided, but I feel there has been a two-sided, in the sense there has been a local media as well. How did Mizo newspapers, Mizo media saw? Because in the 1960s, I also worked on that area. There were a lot of newspapers, Mizo language. I don't know how they represented. That the representation from the rest of India, I mean, the way they have done it is not that going to be in Nagaland, wherever there was rebellion against the Indian state. You know, the media coverage was similar. But I would be interested in what the local media has said. So if you have covered that, that would be very interesting, and see the contrast between them. Number one. Number two, I have this issue about nationalism. Now, nationalism, I just have written a book called Nation and Its Operations. It's just published, not it out in India, but I translated. I have talked about that, nation is not an indigenous idea. It originated in Europe, but the way it originated is very interesting. And that is why I think universities are such an important science. Like in India, I could not refer in my talk, I mentioned in the February 2016 episode in JNU, where nationalism was debated, and because of which those activities were persecuted. But nation as a discourse had originated in European universities only. And nation was a discourse always of othering. Like one group of people, they say they belong to other nation. In the university, there are a number of groups of people, this group of people from another nation. That is how nation originated. So nation has always from the beginning is a discourse of othering. And if you see the evolution of it, now we say we are nation, we have kind of internalized it and identified as a self-goal or as a self-identification. It was not supposed to mean that. The way the discourse of nationalism came to India and the way we propagated it has to be debated. I found that there was well-known Professor Guha has written forward, an immensely important forward to Tagore's idea of nationalism. He was vehemently against it. He talked about it in the heart of nation in Japan and America. But why did he oppose it? That is very important, I would say. Similarly, I found the proponent of nationalism in India, right from Gandhi to Nehru, all of them sometime or the other opposed the idea of nationalism. So we don't go by, told my students before retirement, when was taking place, what is your identity? He said, we Indians are a nation. I said, but have you always been a nation? Why do you call yourself a nation? Before the British, were you a nation? Was bigger India a nation? How did this identification of nationhood come about? When did they accept it? And what was the process through which we accepted our identification as a nation? So unless we understand all these, the discussion of nationalism will be just appropriating the idea of nationalism from Europe. Otherwise, so the way we appropriate it and the way we did not accept some aspect of nationalism is very important. So what I'm saying, this othering of aspect of nationalism is very important. That must be important. There are those media which has opposed any dissenting voice as terrorism, extremism, all these. They othering them because they feel they are, by othering them, they are becoming the apostle of Indian nation state or Indian nationalism. Anybody who, unless you conform, you are anti-national or a terrorist or a thing. So in media also this has to be applied, I think. This media, how it behaves. So media is not, people are not coming from heaven and angels. They are, they are one of us who sometimes they are apostles of nationalism, sometimes they are not. When I talk about, I read two poems, Mizo poem here, one of them in 1940s talked about Gandhi and Nehru and we are now free, we are Indians. But at the same time, there were also portrayed that are we Indians? And how do we become Indians? So this dilemma, this dichotomy has to be understood in that context, and that perhaps continues. We already talked the earlier question that Duncan has put out, that why there is so much of silence suddenly with the coming of the present regime. That is also something to do with that. How nationalism behaves. So that theory, if we apply, I think that will be benefit much.
I'm trying to be very brief, but I have a question. What's the time frame for your study? What's the time frame? In what time frame have you looked at these issues?
There were a couple of years that I looked at 1959, 1966, the year of the famine, and then the year of the bombing.
So basically those 2 years, nothing in between or afterwards. Well, I think to get a good perspective, that you'll have to look at a larger time frame, no? And I'm not saying that the media covers itself with glory. I speak as a journalist and writer. Covers itself in glory in these terrible times. But we have to look at what the media is dominated by. Are you looking at the Assam Tribune? You're looking at the Assam Tribune? Yes. Which papers in Mizo are you looking at? Are you looking at local papers also?
So I'm looking at I was focusing on the national papers just to get the perspective.
Must tell you one thing, there's nothing called national media. They're only metro media. Okay? Everything is driven by business in the city. So you will look at the Statesman, which was pretty empty, Northeast, I think. But I would simply say two things. One is try and look at, listen to what All India Radio said. They used to have things called radio newsreels and sometimes discussions. It'd be interesting to get that perspective from those days. And the other thing is, the media at that time and even now was dominated in a different way by government. There was the independent media was really restricted to the metro media, like the Times of India, the Indian Express, and a couple of others. So suggest also that you look at some of the PhD work that has emerged from people. I know that the people, I always used to get these calls from universities and colleges from students saying that I'm working on a piece on mainstream media prejudice against the Northeast. Can I come and see you? So there are lots of things which have been written, and I would urge you to look at some of that because you might find something useful in that.
Thank you very much. So I also think on that point too is that, you know, someone in our children, right, your children, studying the violence of 2023-2024 in this region, are they going to be looking for traditional media sources to tell that story? And if they do, they're going to be terrible, right? The archiving of this conflict is not happening in traditional media, it's happening in other kinds of media, which is the point I was sort of trying to make yesterday, right? That's where we have to look in the future. So the continuity of good sources is very contingent, I think, and often interrupted. Now, one of the most difficult things when you're a moderator is that you often find yourself in a situation where you're between people and lunch, and I think I don't really want to be in that situation any longer. I have panelists who've worked very hard answering some very tricky questions. We've had excellent questions from the audience. I'm looking for who can give me permission to end. Who's boss? So we can. Can I call it? Yeah, call it? Okay. Thank you. Can we please applause for I haven't accidentally promised to feed people, but I think I'll let someone else do that logistics announcement if that's okay. Yeah? Okay. Thank you very much, everybody.
Okay, lunch for our special invitees will be hosted by principal and the registered participants can have their lunch outside.